Yuffie is a beloved character of the original Final Fantasy VII, so having a DLC centered around her was an admittedly delightful concept. Yet, it also spurred a semblance of hesitation, given this DLC's canonical nature to the remake being affixed to introducing Yuffie in a separate and simultaneously told experience. After playing this DLC, there's a variety of mishaps and questionable writing decisions. Stumble aside, we're here for Yuffie, and that's exactly what we got. Final Fantasy VII Remake episode Intermission is 2 chapters long and takes place after the events of Sector 5 Reactor. Players take control of Yuffie and experience Sector 7 from another perspective that was unseeable during the base game. This alone is a cohesive novelty and is served to flesh out a few more of the characters. Yuffie also meets brand new characters who, to be honest, were rather underwhelming in retrospect. For instance, Billy Bob, Polk, and Zaiji were merely plot devices and exposition dumps at best, which is unfortunate. This DLC acts as more of a stepping stone rather than a leap, so hopefully we see more of these characters in the future. This doesn't excuse how forgettable they were, but it's to be expected with this being more of a companion. Sonon, though, is not as easily redeemable. He is the sole party member throughout the DLC. As harsh as this may sound, he was not memorable or stand out enough to make a lasting impact, even with his occasional humorous deliveries during dialogue. While his backstory is conceptually enticing, very little is done for the vast majority of the experience for him to spur any meaningful connection with the player. Cases may vary, but I believe his introduction being in a DLC episode neutered the opportunities that would have otherwise been present in a fully fledged title, especially with his status as the only party member. Although despite him being the only other character, he is not playable and is only AI controlled. This does sound like an inherent negative, but I found that it was a wise move, being that this DLC is a 5 or 6 hour experience assuming a player mostly focuses on the main story. Making Yuffie the only playable character also grants the development team time to focus on her combative capabilities extensively, rather than needlessly branching out to another fighter. This proof can be found in the way Yuffie's combat is designed. She is both close combative and ranged, so you can cover all sorts of ground. In addition to being agile, her primary gimmick is ninjutsu. This is a long-range maneuver that is vital for destroying various enemies. Systems from the original game return, such as materia being imperative as ever and weapon proficiency also present. The combination of Yuffie's fresh take on combat alongside the underlying foundation of remake systems helps makes this DLC feel more distinct regardless of its associated nature. Sonon adds to this unique sense of combative identity as well. He can be controlled via the menu to use abilities and items, for instance, and more importantly, synergize with Yuffie. Synergy makes the two a united force and does wonders for decimating pressured enemies, eventually pushing them to a staggered state. There are even powerful special abilities that can be used during synergy, and in all honesty, are a bit too overpowered in several instances. There's a caveat to Sonon's ATB gauge building up slowly while synergized though, so you can't consistently stay in the state without suffering the ramifications, especially on hard mode. I really had to think about the mechanics on the fly until the final boss on my normal mode playthrough. Spamming attacks and abilities with little thought while occasionally guarding got the job done for the most part. It's a shame because the depth of the gameplay loop can go unnoticed with how poorly the DLC emphasizes and teaches its traits. Dungeon design is one area Intermission undeniably aced. Yuffie's shurikens are taken advantage of and can destroy crates from afar as well as activate switches. These are used in conjunction with each other swimmingly, with events encouraging proper spacing and time slots. This more active involvement in dungeons is a design choice I hope to see in the future instead of the long-winded dull designs we've seen before. The dungeons were the perfect balance of rightfully thought-provoking and digestible without overlaying complications or overstaying their welcome. Minigames were also unexpectedly addicting in this part of the DLC, the Fort Condor being the primary offering. This minigame was present in the original Final Fantasy VII, but altered heavily to make it more contextually sensical and modernized. Players place units on a board and watch events play out against the opposing players' units. The objective is to have more surviving bases by the end of the time. There are several factors to consider, such as not only having the types of units to place, but the affinity triangle, cost of the units themselves, the materia benefits of each board, and far more. In addition to this minigame being a joyous and addicting time, it has roadblocks of difficulty requiring actual strategy. There's even a harder difficulty to this mode to adapt players to go wild. Story-wise, Intermission was a mixed bag. Not much from the first half of the DLC really ever stuck aside from Yuffie's optimism being a comically endearing sight. But once again, Sonon's poorly executed characterization ultimately lessens the potential impact that would have resulted during certain key events. If anything, Yuffie is adequately set up for whatever plans the next title has for her, and some surprise scenes provide further enticing hooks for what awaits. The voice acting from the entirety of the new cast is incredible, with Yuffie being the standout. Her voice actress perfectly nailed her gutsy optimism and vulnerability. Final Fantasy VII Remake Intermission is a must-play for those jumping off from the base game solely to introduce Yuffie and other assuredly key elements and characters. Gameplay-wise, there is an enjoyable depth to the battle system with better use of the environment. Still, the poor difficulty balance and forgettable supporting cast weigh heavily on the experience throughout. You'll ultimately buy it to spend a few extra hours in Midgard, but you'll stay to hang out with Yuffie as we inch closer to part 2 of this remake effort. Noisy Pixel is giving Final Fantasy VII Remake Intermission a 7.5 out of 10. Thank you for watching. Please read the full review at noisypixel.net. Noisy Pixel is run by a group of gamers who work hard to deliver news, reviews, previews, and more. Please subscribe to keep up with all our future content.
Noisy Pixel.